but we're not quite yet. So I expected it to be immediate.
Yes, birds.
I think it's more like mice.
Yeah.
Was it a table? Bird's nest.
No, it's birds up there.
Okay.
Right.
Right, welcome, everyone. First of all, apologies for absence. I believe we've got apologies from Councillor Hinton and Councillor Wiseman, together with Rebecca Chandler-Wild, Sarah Candia, and maybe Kirsten Horsley. So let's then, are there any declarations of interest? Yes, I think so. Public participation. Very happy to have any questions if there are members of the public zoom in, or if not, contact us subsequently. Did you have any requests for participation?
No, I didn't.
So the minutes, approving the last minutes, the last meeting, which was the 28th of March. Are there any items on there that are not covered in our agenda? The progress report actually covers very much the items on the agenda. So I'd suggest that we actually tackle each of them and address them as they come up. So let's start by going first of all to the tree structure. Nick and Patrick, would you like first of all to talk about the progress report and then progress today?
Okay, so we've had various meetings with Danielle and
Danielle's
from Freakonomics, who is doing the report for us. And we've also, she's sent us details of the data that's being imported from EasyTree, which is the system that the council has now installed for tree maintenance. And we've got some queries, particularly Waterman's Spinney, where there are 14,000 trees listed in a hectare or 2 hectares, which is impressive.
Can I just ask where Waterman's Spinney is?
Yeah, above the allotments, behind the Waterman's estate.
Yes, and
Oh, above YMCA. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a result of this, Danielle's provided us with a hit list of all the groups, because it's groups that are a problem. They group large numbers of trees together. The biggest group is 9,000 trees. And we've got a hit list of about 13 groups that we've got to evaluate to find out exactly what they are and what we can expect from them. In other words, what size they are, what thickness they are, so the circumference, and we'll get those data to Danielle. The timescale on that is for when Nick gets back off holiday, so we've got 2 weeks. So if anyone wants to join me in doing tree surveys over the next 2 weeks, you're very welcome to do so. Otherwise, I'm going to be very busy.
Are there any volunteers?
I don't see any hands.
I think there's
Yeah,
one call when you're going down there.
yeah, do it. Be good.
Any other points on the tree structure? There is one item on the progress report which is relevant. Let's talk about how you handle the community aspects of it.
So we've got an issue that we need to address, which is the trees in Henley that are on council land. It's their status. Are they trees that belong to the council, or are they trees that are held in trust by the council on behalf of the people of Henley? And that is a fine point, but it's a very important point. Because if they're trees owned by the council and that's it, then arguably the council could offset all their emissions against those trees. Whereas what it does then is pare away some 10 to 12%, I think it is, of the total land area in Henley, and leave the people of Henley with just their gardens, if they've got one, if they've got gardens, in which to use to offset any emissions for themselves. I've got a view on it, but I'd be interested to know what the views are of the people around the table.
Would you like to give your view first?
Okay, my view is that any trees that exist, are in place, actually are really in the custody of the town council on behalf of the people of Henley. Any trees that we, as the Climate Working Group and the Parks Department, choose to put in additionally, it's up to the town council to decide whether they're being put in to offset their own emissions or whether they're being put in to help offset emissions for the whole town. Because that's an action that the town council is taking, and quite reasonably the town council could take that action on their own behalf or on behalf of the people of Henley. So my view is that the trees that exist at the moment, I would say I deem those to be the town's trees that the council is the custodian of. So that is something I think we need to get straight, because it's going to make a huge difference, both to the council, but it's also going to make a huge difference to the people of Henley.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, I would probably disagree with that, Patrick, because you could then say that Jubilee Park, Mill Meadows, the Town Hall, they belong to the people of Henley.
Well, as an interesting, I think it's a point for Sheridan. I think it's a legal point as to what the status of the town council is and whether it is there as a service to the town or whether it's there as an entity in its own right. So, you know, I think that that's really, we ought to bring this up to to get a sort of legal judgment really as to what the status is. So,
I would say it belongs to the town. Everything that is on town council land belongs to the town, but possibly not the people. So it belongs.
now that's
We
it.
own you.
Yeah. Now, so it's interesting to define what defines the town.
Tracy?
I might suggest that it's owned jointly by the town people.
Well, you've got to define, and I think this is where we need Sheridan's help, and I think he may even need to take counsel on this, because the town as it is only an entity in that it is a parish. That's the only entity that the town as a parish. There is no other legal entity, and so arguably, if there's no legal entity, then it can't own any assets and it doesn't have any rights in law.
Well, the assets owned are owned by public money, but it is delivered by council services.
Yes. So what I'm saying really is what we should do is to boot this one up, say, Sheridan, here's a problem. Please, could you tease out the legal aspect of this? Get back to us and say, what is the status?
Sorry.
We maintain the stuff. We maintain everything
For people.
for people. If there was a thing about trees, isn't it? It was, and then we were responsible because we were actually keeping the upkeep. So it would become our responsibility.
Yes. So it's the same as this building,
Yeah.
or it's the same as lighting and pavilion or anything else. Yeah.
Peut-être, Garth, c'est possible que vous parlez votre procès, s'il vous plaît. Or can you say something, Garth?
I can say something. I didn't hear what you asked, Tony.
So did you,
He was speaking German.
you were speaking, yes, that's right.
Do you have an opinion on
What I've just said,
what Patrick and Kath and Jackie and
No, I think it's a good question. I think we could go to Sheridan with it, and because I think it's really important. So let's take, higher advice.
Jackie?
Only one more question. I'm curious why it's important to differentiate between the council and people of Henley.
because the town council has a carbon footprint,
Mm,
and it's the council has signed up to net zero by 2030. And the people of the town also have carbon footprints, and quite a lot of them are now looking to reduce their carbon footprint. So one way of reducing your carbon footprint is offsetting against assets.
I understand that,
trees.
yeah.
So if the town council takes all the trees and uses nets and uses those to offset their emissions, then job done. But it leaves the people of Henley sort of saying, where's my little 5% or 10%? Because all they've got then, if they're lucky, is the trees in their garden.
But aren't we just going to look at the area as a whole and look at the total?
We're looking at two different things. The town council is looking in committee at its own emissions.
Yeah.
And the climate working group is working on reducing the total emissions for the whole town. And arguably, for this working group, it doesn't matter, because you net out the emissions of the town council, you're still netting out emissions that are local emissions. The problem comes where you've got people that would like to go for zero themselves, and they're living in a flat somewhere, and you can't get down to zero if you're in a house which has got heating bills and it's consuming energy and so on. But with the help of offsetting against local trees, and I'd go further than that and say that we as the climate working group, as the trees part of it, are actually going beyond the boundary of the parish. And we're looking, we're even looking at planting trees in Highmore. Now, Highmore has 45% woodland coverage. So Highmore is zero carbon already. They don't have a problem in Highmore, but we still want them to plant more trees to help us out. So it's looking at the thing globally, and I think it would be helpful for the people of Henley if they were able to share in that.
Well,
Sorry.
okay,
Sorry.
I think this is quite important.
Yeah, so I think an additional point is that also, I think as a council, we want to set an example, don't we, for residents. So to say we keep hold of all those.
Yeah.
It would be a little bit, it wouldn't set the right example, I don't think, whereas if we can demonstrate that this is what we've done, the analysis, the action we've taken, yes, it's hard work, but this is what it's delivering, then you can then spread the message to your residents and give them a head start with,
I think that's the other point, is that we are actually
This is really
assisting
important.
the residents of Henley by looking after these trees and planting more trees. And so we're actually, we can be seen to be proactive and positive about it.
Yeah.
I think Patrick's point about asking Sheridan is the right way forward.
Yes, I
I
agree with
don't
that.
think we can resolve it here, no matter how many opinions there are. And I think what I would like, Patrick, if you can do it in the next 2 weeks, if we can set up a meeting with Sheridan in the next 2 weeks, let's try and resolve it quickly. If anyone would like to be part of it, that would be very helpful.
Could I suggest that we leave it until Nick is back, until Kath is back?
Yeah.
And that because I think it's important that Nick and Kath are both in that meeting. so that we've got
Right,
everyone, and I think it's also, it could well be another climate working group that would invite the group if they so want to join in.
is that all right, Nick? Okay,
This is fine for me.
I'd agree. I just think that further discussion on this would be
Yeah,
really
well-
valuable. And whilst I remember, one thought I'm having is that you could have 3 categories. You could have what's considered owned by the people, what's considered owned by the council, and more commonly owned.
I think we need advice as to who can and cannot own. that
Well,
thing.
I say by own, who,
A portion,
yes.
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
What might be useful, Patrick, I'm not saying trade economics have this information, find out how other councils address it. Because there must be other people in the same situation. So I don't know whether it's possible to ask them the question. But if you want to have a meeting when Kath and Nick are available, could you perhaps find out when Sheridan, if he has a holiday plan, then we might be waiting until September. But let's, so if we can take an action on that, Nick, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Let's go on then to the next item on the agenda,
Thank you.
which is decarbonisation. We'll come back to the progress report, but there is a progress report statement. Nick, without talking about the subsequent information we've had before, could you just describe what you've done so far in terms of looking at data and identifying how robust it is?
Okay. So one of the things that I've been doing is going back to the data that we have for the year that we had, or rather that the group had previously identified as wanting to be the baseline year, and so 2019 to 2020. So I've been looking at a lot of bills, and what I've found is that, of course, a lot of the utility bills that are sent to the council are based on estimates. So they may have done a reading in April and a previous reading in February. So that will give them a period of 2 months, and they'll say, okay, well, based on that usage, we'll assume that you're going to use the same amount for the next period and the next period and the next period. But of course, that gives you a window for February and March, which could be completely misleading on your usage for the year. So just based on the data that we have available for the year that's now 2 years past, it would be very difficult to be able to define what a reliable usage figure was. So what we've suggested is that we do use that data, but that we use 2019 to 2020 as more of a guideline to give us an idea of where we were back then. And what we will do is put in place a mechanism to do more regular meter readings for the upcoming year, which should be more reliable at least. And then we will use that year as a baseline, because that will be much more accurate.
Well, the past 2 years are not going to be accurate because of COVID.
No, we're going to be measuring from now for the next year. So we should be able to see from our usage at this point to the usage in a year's
But
time.
if you went back 3 years,
Yeah.
If you went back to 2018 to 2019 as a year, that should give you some pretty good figures.
I think the problem is, Ken, is the quality of the data
It's poor.
is, yes, that's a polite way of putting it. And it's because the people who normally record this data are used to working in not in units. And this requires information they wouldn't normally go into detail about.
and it's also estimates. So from 1 month to the next, you can't. Some bills will be hanging over for a few months, estimated on, as Nick said, on March. So you take your March reading, and it means in May or June you're still paying your energy bills as if it was still March.
Which you would do, but.
Which is typical, yeah.
But even your home one, at the end of the year, you're going to finish up with a plus or a minus.
Yes,
But the
which
problem
gives
is
you a
that.
figure.
Well,
that's
no,
true.
No,
Divide it by 12.
Yeah, it doesn't.
but the problem is if for a 12-month period, what I've been finding out is that in that 12-month period, 8 of those months may have been billed on an estimate that was for 2 months. So what we don't have is a figure for the start of the year and a figure for the end of the year, because then we could subtract one from the other and get a reliable figure, but we don't have that. So the best that we can do is to say the data that we've got for 2019 to 2020, which is the year before COVID, gives us a good guide. But if we start from now and measure for the upcoming year, then that will give us a more representative guide. And that's the one that we will then call our baseline.
But then you're looking through, like your last winter was mild, whichever way that it's very mild. Next year it might be minus for 2 months.
But this is where the council's plan for decarbonisation comes into effect.
Okay.
And that takes into account the fact that climate will change. I think to go back to 2019-20 and use that as the baseline is wrong. And we don't have a choice, because I don't think there's been enough data collected of good quality to enable us to take subsequent years. So the recommendation is we start with a baseline year 2022, 2023, and take that as the target for net zero.
Tony, can I just add a comment to what Ken was saying? I would have thought there is an opportunity to look back, perhaps over 10 years, at the accounts and to look at what historically the town council was paying on bills, however inaccurate, over that longer period, and then one could correlate that with the weather. And with
There is another issue which comes out, which Nick had identified in terms of the task of pulling out the data, and that is that I will talk about this later, not in public, okay? But what has been the case is that the council signed up the 1st of January to an SSE green electricity. It's described as 100% renewable. If that's the case, then measuring the electricity data is not very significant from the point of view of emissions. I would like perhaps yourself, Patrick, to liaise with Nick, not in the next day or so, certainly, but to investigate whether in fact you think this is 100% renewable. But if it is, we've had a decarbonisation study, which frankly, in terms of electricity, it's been a waste of time.
yes, there are two different aspects to this. One of them is that even green energy has a carbon footprint.
I accept that.
And so minimizing your energy consumption is always a good thing.
Well, that's why I think we need to actually identify what this really
Yes.
means.
Yeah.
So if we can take an action for that, in probably a couple of weeks' time, bear in mind your holiday. One of the things that is in the carbon footprint section of the report is about the need to undertake a fabric first study to evaluate the buildings insulation requirements, and therefore, to take your point, to reduce energy consumption. Now, I've given 3 contacts for that. I don't know whether the council has actually progressed and contacted them, and Kath had it, I think, on her task list to actually follow it up. Do you know?
No, I'll be doing that.
Well, this is about not moving into renewables for emission's sake until we actually find out about what our actual consumption is, whether we can reduce it by insulation or whatever. So that, I think, covers that element. So let's move on then to the other aspects of the what's the start, item 5, net zero 2030 progress report. And first was the communications plan, to issue a statement, a report on baseline commitments and tactics for net zero by 2030. I think what is important is that in terms of achieving this, it's not just a communications plan, it's internal recognition of committee chairs and committee officers to set actions. And there's a great risk that what we might see is that we get to 2029 and we then start talking about how we're going to reduce emissions, and we have to have actions in place. And I think that's an important aspect. It's not just next to communication. I don't know where we're at in terms of appointing a communications officer.
Communications officer has been appointed. Her name's Daisy. She started last week, so she's in the process of onboarding, and once she's fully taken over her role, then we'll engage with her on this.
Well, let's have that discussion, but from Kath and Nick's perspective, we've got to challenge each of the committees to reduce their own baseline and have actions in place. There is intent to have a communications meeting with local parishes where we can share our own initiatives, but also learn from them as well. I don't know where we're at on that. That sort of reaction.
My understanding from the handover that I was given was that Fiona had sent out a communication to all the parishes, inviting response to set something like this up. I understand you did something similar a couple of years ago, but that there'd been no responses.
Apart from 10.
Apart from 10.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and have the meeting with 10,
okay,
and invite the others to come along if they wish.
Sure.
All right. Tame is actually very positive. And I know the guy who's leading it. They have they tend to be fairly independent of council. But that doesn't mean you can't offer ideas and so forth. The next item on the progress report was environmental impact of events. And what we were talking about here was that I think it's ubiquitous if the council has a zero carbon approach, and yet an event that occur in the marketplace, for example, or any other premises that are owned by the council, if those events do not follow zero carbon approach. And I think Kath was going to look at the list of policies in place so that that could be used as a means of setting the standards for all the individual
Yes, I looked through the policies and I sent a list to Sarah. I also discussed this with Sheridan, who was going to raise it with the new town centre manager, who's just started this week, in fact. So we'll be discussing it with her as well.
I had an informal conversation with the new town centre manager about it this afternoon, and she seemed quite positive, and she's had experience of other councils that have done similar. So she can.
What is interesting is I went round the market this morning, and there's one store which has got a bank of about 3 Edmonds, all Calagas pallet. And I'm not saying you can do this immediately, but at some stage the council's got to set standards which say this is what we expect for ourselves, and as a consequence, we expect that you to do the same. So and that is a challenge how it's managed, but it's otherwise we are being putting our head in the sand.
I suppose the same thing could be said, because I don't know if it's relevant, but like certain people keep parking on the marketplace, and they seem to think they can, but they're not meant to. And it's like the emissions that creates from their vehicles. It's like, you know, yeah, it's difficult. It is difficult because how would the people cook their produce and keep it warm without the kind of?
Well,
How would they do
one of
that?
the things is to investigate the electricity supply and see how strong it is, because there are 3 points on the
Yeah.
market square, and the council, if they're signing up to zero
Yeah,
carbon energy supply of electricity, could potentially insist that the anyone that cooks on the market square use electric cooking and charging.
So you mean to say nobody be cooking on gas in the future? In
Wow.
more ways than one.
Yeah, yes, yeah, it's coming. Like it or not.
but then you have other, like if we had events, how would that happen?
Well, that's the question. I think
we
it's
have to make a waiver for that, because
The
otherwise
council has to set its standards.
it's difficult one, isn't it?
Absolutely.
yeah, it
That's
is
why
difficult.
Councils have a job.
It's
I
a
mean,
difficult one.
We're going to be in trouble one way or the other.
It is a difficult one because a lot of these stalls have like, is it diesel heaters and stuff, and
These
Yeah.
are ours.
yeah, I know. So yeah, but I don't know how we do it. They'd have to have solar panels on their things. Or
No,
something, or-
but if there's a main supply,
yeah, but if you've got lots of stall holders, how
well,
do you-
that's where we need to find out how strong
it's
that
like the
supply
farmers
is.
market. That's all produce, you know. Like,
Well, you don't have one thing for the council and another thing for all the people who use council premises.
it's difficult, isn't
It's
it?
just difficult.
There's also the risk, isn't there, that some storeholders will stay away because they find it too much hassle or too much faff, and that you lose some of the character of those markets. But then again, all the councils at some point will have to follow, I'm sure, the same strategy,
Yeah.
right? So it's good to set an example. I think
Yeah.
would be the right thing, but it might not be that easy.
I
No,
think
it's difficult.
Yeah.
if we're proactive about it, identify what resources we've got, and then promote it and say, look, we're a zero carbon council. We want you to engage with that, and we want you, when you come here, to do all electric cooking or whatever.
I'll let you speak to them.
Well, I'll speak to Bill. I mean, they don't. Actually, the farmers market, there's very little of
Yeah.
that. It's the other one.
But also,
Yeah.
we don't need to make these changes overnight.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
we say, okay, this is going to be our policy effective
Yeah.
from a year's
Next year.
time or whatever, and
That's
give
correct.
people an opportunity to respond to it
Yeah.
positively.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it's difficult, but we need to do
Okay,
it.
well, that's down to Kath. And
There you are, Kath.
Centre manager. Thanks, Kath, for that. 2 other items on the progress report, the Chiltern Hills Community Energy. Just to say, and I'll talk about this after the public presentation, that we're in discussion with 3 buildings in the Henley area for solar panels. And then also we had discussion with Woking Borough Council. And we were to advise them of any initiatives that could impact their side of the river, which might be able to start talking about events or activities that have to do with heavy, whatever that might be. Are there any points on the transport strategy? With the exception of the very last one, is the electric vehicle charge points at Mill Meadows. That I've seen them there, but it's not yet active on it.
They're not yet active, no. There's been a slight issue with the installation done by SSE that we will need to get them to resolve before we're able to connect everything up and make it live. But everything is in place now. It just needs for them to come back and do some electrical work. And then we'll be ready to switch on.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking of the car parks themselves as well. There's a delay with the, it's a global delay with shortage with the chips or something, isn't there? That's also causing a whole.
I don't think
Yes,
that's
but I
affecting
realised I
us.
was thinking
Yeah,
of the
sure,
wrong
yeah,
place.
yeah,
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 sorry.
yeah. Okay. Any other points on the transport?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. So therefore, let's set a date for next meeting, and then I'll close down the public.